Good evening. My name is John Beal. I'm the chair of the Belfast Climate Crisis Committee, and I want to welcome you tonight. This meeting is jointly presented by the Belfast Climate Crisis Committee and by a nonprofit, Climate Solutions of Waldo County. The Climate Crisis Committee is a committee of the City of Belfast. Our mission is to catalyze community efforts for a sustainable future and adaptation to climate change. It also means working to mitigate the community's carbon footprint and deliver cost savings. That's the purpose of tonight's meeting. The Climate Solutions Waldo County is a newly formed nonprofit whose goals include supporting the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, increased use of renewable energy, and carbon neutral economic growth throughout Waldo County, including but not limited to Belfast. The president and one of the incorporators, Hank Reisman, will speak shortly about the relevance of solar power to the climate crisis. The title of this meeting is Go Solar Now, Why 2020 is the Year to Install Solar Power. It will focus on recent legal and financial developments in solar power. Changes in Maine law and regulations are making it possible for businesses, homeowners, renters, and nonprofit organizations to convert to solar electric power more affordably than ever. Existing federal tax laws also encourage solar installations, and because some of those tax laws are phased out in future years, now may be the time for people to most seriously consider converting to solar. Present with us tonight are representatives of 3 companies in the business of installing solar electric power. Each has written materials on the table and back. The 3 companies are Revision Energy, Sundog Solar, and InSource Renewables. The following are brief descriptions of each of these companies, drafted by each of them at our request. InSource Renewables is an employee-owned solar contracting firm based in Pittsfield and a leader in state solar policy. InSource is one of the only 10 NABCEP accredited PV installation companies in North America and was recognized by B Lab in 2019 as a best for the world company for ranking in the top 10% of B Corps around the world for its treatment of workers. I will not explain all the acronyms. Sundog Solar opened for business in 2010. Since then, they've designed and installed hundreds of high-quality solar electric systems throughout Maine. We have 30 employees dedicated to changing Maine's energy paradigm and providing great customer service. And then finally, Revision Energy. Their roots go back to 1993 when Bill Barons co-founded the Green Store in downtown Belfast and sold off-grid solar to folks in Waldo County and beyond. 10 years later, Bill established Revision Energy in Liberty, which has grown from 2 guys working out of a barn to 252 employee owners across 5 locations with more than 8,000 solar installations under their work belts. A certified B Corporation since 2015, Revision also recently named 2019's Clean Energy Company of the Year by Northeast Clean Energy Council and just wrapped up the installation of 2 solar projects at the Blaine House in Augusta. 2 of these companies' representatives will present information about recent developments which are the subject of this meeting, after which the representatives of all 3 companies will provide information in a Q&A session. First, however, I'd like to introduce Hank Reisner, who will provide us with some context as to why it matters that we install solar power. Hank?
Yeah, great. Thanks, John. So, hi everyone. Thank you for coming, and thank you for being part of this effort. I see a lot of people I've seen before. How many new people here tonight who haven't been to these public talks and public meetings? Oh, great. Almost half of you. Welcome. So Solar Energy Now is really the title of the evening and the focus of our talk tonight and our presentations. My part here is doing a presentation that is to remind us why we're here and why we're talking about solar energy, why we're talking about renewable energy. So I'm going to start where I often start. This is a slideshow. It'll be short, but it will show you what's happening in our world and why we're so intent on expanding renewable energy. Thanks, Nick. This is clearly our Earth. I love these slides of Earth from space. And this is probably the most famous photo of the Earth known. It's sometimes called the blue marble photo. It's hard to miss that we're all in this world together. We're all in this together. What happens anywhere and everywhere happens to all of us. This is our atmosphere. This is a very thin layer, fragile, thin layer of air, gases, just the right temperatures that provide the incredibly vital source for life on this planet. So far, this is the planet we know and that we know of. Unfortunately, this is what we've been doing. Over the past 170 years, gradually and increasingly in the past 60 or 70, we've been pouring greenhouse gases, pollutants into our atmosphere. Now, there are numerous sources of greenhouse gases. This slide shows many of them. And all of them matter, all of them are important. But this little slideshow and the relevance of this presentation tonight is really going to be focusing on what to do about this. And this is what's causing the warming of the planet. The amount of carbon dioxide increasing in our atmosphere is going up. And has been going up especially rapidly over the past 60 or 70 years. And the results of these greenhouse gases is that our atmosphere is warming. The greenhouse gases are trapping the heat in our atmosphere and the temperature is going up. Again, you can see that especially since around the 1950s and 60s and increasingly. This is a little graph showing the same trend in Maine over the same period or past 120 or 30 years. And this is what's happening to our oceans. This is our local North Atlantic, and in particular the Gulf of Maine, for some strange and particular reasons, is warming faster than most any other part of the oceans of the world. And the results of this warming, atmospheric and ocean warming, is numerous effects. This is just a slide of this hurricane, a Category 5 Hurricane Irma, that stayed at Category 5 for 3 days. It was a record that never happened in recorded history. This is just a slide of our local Belfast harbor during a storm surge that did damage at our waterfront in 2017. And of course we know about glacial melt. The Arctic ice is melting at increasing rates. The Antarctic ice shelf is melting. Greenland is melting. We are seeing a meltdown all over the world, including land-based glaciers in Asia. And of course, the result of that is that the sea levels are rising. This is a mimic slide of that same glacier 30 years later. And this is a very recent slide, photo of last June in Greenland. One of the effects of the strangeness of global warming is that the weather is erratic and the climatic changes are erratic. So there are more severe thunderstorms along with more powerful hurricanes. There are wetter, in fact, wetter times of the year and drier times. I was just hearing today on Maine Public Radio, they were interviewing and talking with forestry people from Maine, and the first sentence out of the person's mouth was, the conditions in Maine are drier when drier and wetter when wetter. And then she went on to talk about what that meant for the forestry industry and the forestry work. This is a slide of near Portland, or in Portland in 2015. Torrential flooding because of rainfall. And we're seeing, of course, fire in strange places, most notably for us locally, or locally, so-called locally would be in the United States, is in the Southwest and in the West. California's had devastating fires, but fires are happening in all parts of the world, in Russia, in Scandinavia, strangely in Greenland they're having fires. Australia just had a series of devastating fires in their eastern provinces. And of course, droughts. And again, I mentioned that both there are wetters and there are droughts in places in the world. So it's erratic and extreme is what the signs are in the local weather. In fact, this slide was taken about near parts of South Africa in which they literally virtually ran out of water in Cape Town. They were on the brink of not having drinking water a year ago. There are other effects that we're seeing that are the result of the climate crisis. I don't have slides for those, I'm just going to be naming them. We are seeing the movement of animals. Fish are moving to cooler water. Plants are slowly migrating. Disease vectors, often involving insects, are moving. Tropical diseases are showing up in parts of the mid-latitudes when they never were here before. Crops are clearly being affected in different parts of the world by droughts and the heat, clearly by flooding. This last spring in our own upper Midwest, there was devastating flooding. Farmers were affected, some of them not recovering from that flooding. And people are moving as well. So we're seeing climate migration. We're seeing people moving because they have no food, they can't grow crops, and these are the symptoms of the effects of global warming and the climate crisis. We have some solutions. The news is challenging for all of us, I know, and yet we have some technologies that are already decarbonizing our atmosphere and our energy systems, and those systems being the way we heat and power our buildings, and the way we move ourselves around, the way we transport ourselves, and maybe less significantly, our industrial productions. And the most significant of these technologies are the use of wind and the sun. So wind power and solar power. A couple of these slides are from other sources, but we know that wind is just almost an untapped resource, even though wind power is expanding in places all over the world, in Scotland, in our Midwest, Kansas, Nebraska, Australia has huge wind power farms and processes going, and still the capacity and the potential for wind power is immense. And of course, we have the sun. And our subject for tonight, of course, is about solar energy. And this is the incredible potential of solar that we're going to get to talk a little bit more about in detail. I also wanted to share something that is happening as we speak, as we are meeting here. The COP25 meeting, which is the meeting of international experts and authorities and people in positions of power, are meeting in Madrid as we speak. And they are at their 25th meeting. It's really incomprehensible to me that they have met 25 times already. But they're meeting to talk about the Paris agreements, to fortify those agreements, and to hopefully make even more robust commitments. But I wanted to play this for you. However, my slide says it can't locate the internet server to play that. So I have another slide which is from the same person. This is Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General. He said that we are confronted with a global climate crisis, and the point of no return is no longer over the horizon. It is in sight and hurtling towards us. Our war against nature must stop, and we know that it is possible. We simply have to stop digging and drilling and take advantage of the vast possibilities offered by renewable energy and nature-based solutions. So tonight, we're going to be focusing on the sun and what the sun can do and how the sun can help us solve this and respond to this particular dilemma that we are all in on this beautiful planet that we live on. And more specifically, why now is an important time to go solar, especially in Maine. Your turn, Mr. Vaughn.
Okay. Thank you, Hank. That was, this is Vern Woodruff from InSource Energy, who has been working closely with the new administration in Augusta to help pass some of the legal and regulatory changes that we'll be talking about tonight.
So, as John introduced, my name is Vaughn Woodruff. I'm the CEO and founder of InSource Renewables up in Pittsfield. We do solar contracting. We do EV charging, we do heat pumps, we sometimes are able to function computers. And in a funny way, so I moved back home to Maine 10 years ago this year. I was out in Montana when I started the business. And I didn't realize at the time when I started contracting business, I was also getting into government relations. But that is an important piece of what, as we talk about global problems and global issues, it's also, we need to understand that all these systems act together, and especially as we start looking at decarbonizing electricity. We have an electrical grid that we all have invested in over time, and all of the regulations and everything that's been built around it have been based on a model that's quickly changing. We've gone from the idea of having large centralized generation facilities that deliver things one way to a grid that's evolving into much like the internet, where electricity is going in two directions. We're incorporating batteries and electrical storage and EVs. And unfortunately, that means that in Maine and in many states, it requires a lot of interaction with regulators and politicians. So, I mean, there are a lot of great people that spend time in Augusta and Hallowell. And I've had the good fortune, for the LePage's second administration, I was the chair of the state trade group. So you probably can guess how those 4 years went in terms of just the general stuff. So this is a bunch of the stuff that John is over. We don't need to worry about it. What I want to talk about is what's changed. The focus tonight is on why now. Many people probably have a sense that things are changing with solar. It started with the election of Janet Mills, in which without anything changing in substance, the signal that that sent to the market, we saw people buying solar for the simple piece of, I finally feel okay about buying solar, right? We were plagued with uncertainty. We were plagued with some things that were challenging in terms of logic during the last administration. And there was a lot of work that was done creating relationships. I work a lot with John's colleague, Fortunat Mueller, on stuff related to the Public Utilities Commission and at the State House regarding solar. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to look at like what's changed. Like something changed, we know it changed. There have been articles in the paper that have talked about change. Half the time they're not all that accurate or not all that complete. So you're going to get the Cliff Notes version tonight here of what changed. This first slide, it's hard to see in this light, but there's a little sticker on this thing that says gross. These were gross meters, and we're going to get into them. They are the epitome of what happened when we enter into a regulatory framework that doesn't take into account the voices of all the stakeholders. One of the first things that happened in this legislative session was the result of other work that had been done behind the scenes for the last couple of years with the Public Utilities Commission, helping the Commission to understand that what they don't understand, which was how solar installations integrate with the grid and how complicated that can be. So the first thing that came out was that most people said, I agree, right? Gross metering's pretty gross. We tried to implement we didn't, we tried to stop implementation, but what happened during the last administration was the Public Utilities Commission put in a new rule to put in these new meters and to pay the companies that are here to put in these new meters, and you paid for them. And the whole goal of that was to capture what would otherwise be costs given to solar customers for energy that they generate at their own home and use at their own house that never touched the grid. It came to pass that the investment, let me just kind of show, that's the problem. This was one of the first ones that we had put in. In a normal solar installation prior to this, all we needed was this meter, which is a meter that sticks on the side of just about everyone's house here. All of this other stuff, this was all equipment that you all paid for to the tune on this project, I think, of $1,600 to recoup, I think, $40 a year. Not a great investment. You know, it wasn't my major in college. I took some classes, not a great investment at the end of the day. Over time, we helped people recognize that. At the end of the day, the solution that needed to happen was for the legislature to act, right? The Public Utilities Commission is there to regulate the utilities. The legislature creates the laws that the commission has to follow. In this case, the commission didn't really do its job. And so the legislature came in and said, guess what? First thing we need to do is we need to get rid of gross metering and get us back to net metering. So net metering is the very simple exchange that happens in a majority of states around the country. If you generate more electricity than you're using at one time, you push it to your neighbor's house, it goes through the grid backwards, or through the meter backward. The meter basically counts those credits and then trades you for credits at night or other times where you're not generating enough electricity to power your house. It's a pretty simple mechanism. There's a reason why it's used across the country, which is that, number one, it's simple to implement, and number two, there really aren't any costs that you have to worry about until you start to see very significant penetration of solar. So one of the first things that happened was LD 91 was introduced, an act to eliminate gross metering. March 21st, the bill passed the legislature. On April 2nd, the governor signed the bill into law. So of all of the things that Governor Mills has done to help our piece, the most basic help that she provided was when a bill that had solar with bipartisan support came across her desk, she signed it. Right? We've had strong bipartisan support throughout the LePage administrations. This was a big, so we're going to take questions at the end if that's okay, because they only gave me we only have a little bit of time to go through this, but I'd be happy to answer questions on this. And this was one of the victorious, of all of the licks that we took over the previous 4 years. On April 9th, a week after the governor signed it into law, the Public Utilities Commission could have waited till September to do this. And they got up and they passed they passed an emergency rule. ending gross metering immediately. And one of the quotes from one of the commissioners was, "We need to end this because it's an imminent threat to ratepayers of Maine," which was like, yes. I was sitting in my office and I was like, yes. It was like just one of those like small victories of finally that seeing the light. So now we are in net metering. Now we are back to the standard. It's a very simple piece. We don't have to worry about additional costs to ratepayers, and it's very simple in terms of what's happening with that mechanism. There have been other challenges with solar, right? It's not just the regulatory climate that needs to adapt. It's also how we assess things. Here's a classic example that's been in the paper. There are a number of communities across the state in which municipalities and folks who are investing in solar have been at odds because it's really hard to assess. There aren't enough homes sold to say that solar necessarily increases the property values all the way across. There have been some towns where they go in and say, oh, I count, okay, 20 panels. It's worth $1,000 per panel. We're going to put that on top of your valuation, and now your property tax bill has gone up. Which is a really challenging piece when new technologies are coming in, because you don't want to deter with over-aggressive taxation early on, because then you don't see investment at all. So there will be no tax base to reclaim. And we've seen high-profile instances of this across the country. And so that inconsistency and unpredictability led to people. We had projects where people who'd had bad tax relationships with their municipality before just say, I can't get predictability out of the town, I'm done. I'm not going to do this. The same thing was happening with businesses that were looking to invest to strengthen their business investment, competing with companies in other states that had solar and able to stabilize their costs, and not knowing whether there would be some projects that the Maine State Revenue Services would say would be tax exempt and others that weren't. So the solution, and this is probably one of the least publicized bills related to solar that's gone through, was equipment tax exemption across the state for solar. And it actually did several things. Number one, it put a blanket equipment tax exemption for residential and commercial applications as long as they create bill credits to the customer. So not like big central generation plants that are just selling wholesale, but these actually have to benefit Mainers. It removed uncertainty for solar investors. The other piece of this is it was one of those pieces where lots of people win, right? So folks wanting to invest in solar, they won. Municipalities, anytime there's a tax exemption passed at the state level, the state has to reimburse them 50% of what would be considered lost revenue. For a lot of states, for a lot of the municipalities, they have no way of count. Belfast does, because we pull electrical permit here. But if you go over to other towns, like if you go over to Monroe, there's no permit required for putting in solar. They have no idea if it goes in, right? So there is no building of the tax base. Now with this, in order to get the exemption, folks have to self-report, and in doing so, it actually helps generate local revenue, which, as many of you know, has been a tough piece with revenue sharing and everything else that's been going on. So the state has to reimburse that, and the state gets benefits from the economic activity that takes place as a result. So this is from our Solar Trade Association, the national one. This is their 2018 report on solar meaning business. Businesses investing in solar. Who are the top players? This shows the top players. Some of these folks have a footprint in the state of Maine. There's only one of them. Does anyone know which one of these is actually invested in solar in the state of Maine? Walmart. No, not Walmart. I heard that one. Target, because it was a mission-based investment for them. Walmart, I don't know how many mission-based investments they make. You know, Walmart oftentimes are really driven by economics. And other companies like in Aroostook County, they watch this and say, oh, Walmart did an LED lighting upgrade. I'm going to do an LED lighting upgrade because I know it makes financial sense because they did it. The reason why you've got Kohl's in Maine, we've got Macy's in Maine, we've got a few other places in Maine, state level policy really matters on this, and we really were failing our small businesses. And this is dairy farms, this is grocery stores, this is anybody who takes electricity at the medium, is a medium or a large electrical consumer. They had barriers, financial barriers to actually being able to benefit from solar. So if you're manufacturing wood products, say you're a furniture maker, and you're competing with furniture makers in Massachusetts, you were receiving benefits that were probably 40 to 50% less than those in Massachusetts. If we're trying to catalyze economic development, we don't want to put our businesses at a disadvantage. And that had to do with rate design. So that was one of the problems. Here's another challenge, which was we had on community solar. So we have renters, we have low and moderate income households, we have a number of folks that could benefit from solar, but there are barriers to it. And community solar in lots of states have been shown to remove those barriers. We had a barrier on that. We could really only have 9 participants, and there was a cap on the size of the project that could go in. The solution to both of these is what I believe will be the most comprehensive solar bill ever passed in the state of Maine, just because of where we were in playing catch up and where things are going, which was LD 1711. So with regards to the rate design problem, the reason that was a problem for businesses is because they don't pay for energy only as kilowatt hours, right? Like your house, if you use twice as much energy, your bill is twice as much. If you go to a dairy farm, on the CMP side of their bill, if they ran that operation the first day of the month and then disappeared for the other 29 days, what they owe on the CMP side of their bill would be almost the same as it would be if they were operating every day of that month, because it's based on peak demand, how much they need at any one time. And so what 1711 did was create what we call a rate tariff. At the end of the day, it means that it created a credit in dollars and cents instead of kilowatt hours, so that that credit could be applied to any charge on a bill, which all of a sudden increases the benefits for commercial customers by about 40%. And that changes the game significantly for them and for other folks that might invest in solar and sell them the energy. Community solar, we had a cap. They went hog wild on this. We had proposed lifting the cap from 10 to 200, and then increasing the size of these by a factor of 3. They increased it by a factor of about 8, and they said no cap. When we were sitting in that committee, it was like a bizarro world compared to where we had been before. Which is why you've probably seen things in the paper. You have developers from out of state that are looking for 25 to 30 acre plots, calling all kinds of farmers, calling people who live near substations, trying to develop this size of project for community solar projects. So here's just a brief cliff notes in terms of what we expect to change. I expect residential rooftop to increase, because the number one factor that's common to most folks that invest in solar across the US is that they live close or know somebody who has solar. It's not the environment, it's not money, that's the number one factor. And so the more that we see of this, the more comfortable we feel with it, the more we recognize that it's a viable alternative. Commercial rooftop is going to be much more prevalent. It's a market that really hasn't existed in the state except for a few companies that have largely done it from a mission-driven investment. Community solar is going to be big. I think it's actually going to be too big to start with. We're actually working on messaging now, because at the end of the day, buying and owning solar, if you can, at your place, is going to be the number one way to do it. You're going to get the most value from it. Community solar is going to be a very easy way to access solar, but you may not be able to access all of the benefits of solar. You may save 10% on your bill. It may come locally. You may not be achieving the climate benefits that you're hoping to achieve with that. And there's some subtleties of that we can talk about later. But I'm really excited about it because it's going to reduce barriers for a lot of Maine households where, right, they don't have tax liability, they rent, right, they can simply save money on their bills. That's a very, very strong value proposition from solar. Solar jobs are going to be ridiculous. I mean, right now that's going to be the bottleneck. We don't have enough solar workers in the state to build the amount of solar they're talking about over the next 3 to 5 years, which means a lot of opportunity for folks in not just in the installation side, but in the supporting pieces, in the finance side of things, design, etc. I'm an engineer from University of Maine originally. I'm running into all of my classmates that I haven't seen for 20 years who are calling me up now saying, I think we're going to be doing business together. We need to do site plans for solar. Help me understand this. So it's going to benefit a lot of sectors across. And then finally, I think one of the pieces that we'll see is anytime new policies come, especially when they come at the speed that they did over this last session, we're going to take a look at them and we're going to see and adjust them to make sure that they're serving the purpose of benefiting all of the people of Maine in a manner that also helps us to address the other goals that the state has ahead of itself for climate, for energy, for economic development, etc. So I'd be happy to take questions at the end once we get to it. But yeah, I'll let John come on up and kind of talk about what this looks like now in terms of taking advantage of the various policy changes and how to utilize it. So, thank you.
Thank you, Vaughn. Thank you, everyone, for coming out. Pre-storm hysteria. Glad we're all here. Real quick, and we're going to do a nice Q&A at the end. So usually I love to have questions happening throughout, and I know there's been a lot of tempting moments and all this for Vaughn's part. So I promise to get to that spot. Just to give you a precursor in terms of where we're trying to head right now, I'm just going to talk real quick about the basic equipment and what goes there. I'm going to move pretty quick because I think I'm preaching to the choir here. I see a lot of faces in this crowd that already have solar. I'm going to talk about payment options in terms of how to go about that, and then essentially the incentives that are currently available and why next year is going to probably be the busiest year that I know any of the solar companies that are here tonight have ever seen. So real quick, roof-mounted equipment. We're talking about solar panels. You can see a picture there. Typically when we talk about solar panels historically, it's usually been on roofs, but now ground mount options are becoming a more viable option. And it's a pretty simple system. There's solar modules and there's essentially an inverter, and that inverter changes the electricity from a DC current to an AC current and ties that in. It's amazing how these systems are becoming just very, very well engineered. There's monitoring features to be able to see how the system is doing, so you know how that equipment is doing and if it's working for you. Ground mount options, like I said, are nice. One of the big things about a roof mounted system is the actual roof. What is the condition of the roof? Will those panels have to come off the roof, and how soon? So that's something that should be seriously looked at, and usually there's a solar site assessment that a solar company will do to try to look at those and be able to answer those questions to see is that site suitable or not, and if not, you could do a ground mount site at your location. And then, as Vaughn was just talking about, solar farm option is a remote sited array, and that's going to be an option as well in terms of where we're going. And realistically, that's going to change the landscape in Maine. Anybody who's driven through Vermont, Massachusetts has seen large solar farms and fields of solar. That's going to happen in Maine. It's going to happen really quickly, and we're going to have to deal with it as a community in terms of where these go and how they get sited. And but essentially, the advantage of that is we can, with a large ground mount installation, you get the economy of scale, and then that electricity those credits can be applied to either individual accounts through a solar farm, or if it's a large commercial account, that could get applied to a commercial off-taker. And usually commercial, off-takers, sometimes there's not a roof big enough. You go to a school, they just don't have enough space. You'd have to take all the athletic fields and everything there, and it's just not always a viable option to have everything completely on site. So this is really going to open up that possibility to get larger and larger percentages of our energy as communities that actually come from a local energy source within Maine's borders. And we're talking about larger and larger arrays, such as this one here, but also we'll be doing lots of residential stuff as well. So a good mix. Solar industry is really going to see the commercial sector really grow. To do all this and make it happen, there's payment options. That's usually the biggest hurdle. How most people want to do this, but it's how do you do it, and that's been always a big challenge. I like to just come right out and tell everybody flat out, if you can buy the system with cash, that's your best way to do it. If you have the money in the account, you have a retirement account, you can cash in. That's always the best option you can do. The second after that would be a home equity loan or a mortgage. Right now interest rates are really low, so if you can essentially get some money through that option and then use that to pay for the system outright, that's going to give you the best return on your investment. And then the third would be an unsecured loan. Most solar companies have some kind of loan option that's available. Typically, it's a 10 to 20 year term, and you're in somewhere between 3.9 to 4% interest rate. So those are the options right now. The unsecured loan option tends to come out a little bit more than what you're currently paying. So you have to be willing to pay a premium for that electricity. But the beauty of that is after the end of the term of the loan, that electricity then is all free. And how many Central Maine power bills have everybody in this room written? Imagine if that check that you've written for how many months of your life was an actual payment towards a solar array. Some people here might have bought that solar array a few times. So when you think about your electric bill and what that check is every month, you are in some ways already paying for it. For nonprofits, there's the choice of either just buying the system outright or going into what we call a power purchase agreement. And we've worked with the city of Belfast on a number of those, and there's a whole bunch of examples of those that are starting to pop up around the state, and that's a very exciting option for the nonprofit and municipality sector because they cannot take advantage of the federal tax credits, whereas that option allows for investors to get those tax credits and then essentially just sell the power to the off-taker. And here's the big news item. This is what's driving all of the in our world, the hysteria. We call it the solar coaster. This industry is pretty crazy. And right now, we just are leaving the 30% federal tax credit, and we're going into the 26% tax credit for 2020. After that, it's going to drop to 22%, and then that will be the end of residential tax credits as of right now. So the next 2 years are going to be really, really busy. All the people that wish they got the 30% are really going to kind of think about getting it at that level, which is still a really, really nice tax credit and makes the financials on a project like this work really well. Commercial at 2022, it's going to stay at 10%. And this was intentional. The idea was to get the industry jump started and then to bring it down once the pricing and everything starts to get better. There are some rumors of maybe trying to get this extended just because of the planetary things that we need to make happen. The more we can accelerate this change, the faster, the better. So that's what's going to, and I can speak for our company, and I've heard rumors from talking to other solar providers that everybody is super duper busy. Next year is going to sell out faster than we've ever seen before. It happened this year for all of us, and it's going to happen again next year as well. So just something to keep in mind. And just to kind of recap and circle back around why we're doing this, energy security, $5 billion leaves Maine's economy every single year to buy fossil fuels. Imagine if we can keep that money in our borders. What does that do for our economy? Job creation. I know every solar company I talk to is hiring. These are well-paid jobs with health benefits, and it keeps that economy local. And there's a lot of other auxiliary businesses that also are involved in that as well, in terms of electrical supply houses to all the various industries that help support that. And in climate change, as Hank started off this whole thing in the beginning. So that's why we're doing it. And very rarely there's very few things that we can do these days that actually help the planet and have an economic return on it. Very few things you can buy that actually have an economic return. It's we always get asked what's the payback, how many years to pay back, whereas 95% of the products we buy don't have a payback. They all depreciate the moment we buy them. This is the one that actually can help save you money, and if we all do this, can actually help planetarily move the needle a little bit. And we were going to mention it early on and we didn't, and I'm going to mention it now. Solar is only one aspect of this. Conservation is a huge part of this. We talked in the beginning when we were planning this about maybe future events for insulation, heat pumps, efficiency. There's so many sides of this. So solar is not the one magic answer to all this. It's one that we're talking about tonight, and conservation is another one of those, and energy audits, and there's a whole bunch to that. So we don't want to overwhelm people with too many options, and tonight we were just going to focus on the solar side of that. And on that note, we're going to go into Q&A.
There you go.
Thank you.
And what we can do is, if anybody has any questions, we have a mic still, I think. there.
Good thing I didn't bring my slideshow or it would be here all night and stuck in the snow tomorrow. It's a good one though, so I'll offer it to you whenever.
I'll make one comment about what John said. In fact, we're planning on January 6th, our next conference will be about some of the less sexy ways to save the world, like weatherization, heat pumps, all sorts of other ideas. We're hoping to have a representative from Efficiency Maine come up and give a show on that. So put that on your calendars. Meanwhile, Bev, would you like to be the
Sure.
person who hands around the mic,
All right. Hi.
if there are any questions?
I'm Beverly Roxby. I'm part of the Climate Crisis Committee as well. And I'm sure there are going to be plenty of questions. I just saw one back here.
I don't need the mic. Could someone explain how the tax credits work?
So essentially, the way the tax credit, it works on tax liability, so you have to owe money to the government. If you don't have tax liability, then there's nothing there for you. So that is a challenge for...
I don't think that's correct. I think you can carry it over to the following year.
Assuming you have tax liability the following year.
Eventually, yes.
But there are people like retired folks and people who are very, very low income that scenario unfortunately doesn't percolate up for them. But you can, like was just pointed out, you can carry that over if the tax credit exceeds what you owe, and essentially comes right off. So let's say you spend $10,000 on a solar array. That's it used to be easier at 26%, at 30%. So at 26%, that'd be $2,600 to be able to essentially get back in a tax return if you paid that in. If you only owe $1,000 in income tax, you can roll that over to the following year until you use it all up. And that's how it works on the residential side of things. Does that make sense? And on the business side, there's also an added benefit of depreciation, which is about 20%. It depends on what tax bracket you're in. The real quick way to explain it is on the commercial side, the current tax incentives will cut a project in about half. Again, need tax liability, so the business needs to be making money and has to be able to write that off. So that's very, very huge. In commercial sector right now, we're seeing projects be essentially cash positive in year one. You can essentially borrow money at a good interest rate and have that loan payment be below what you would have been paying to the utilities because of those extra little benefits that you're getting on the commercial side of the tax benefit.
But the homeowner doesn't get the commercial depreciation.
Correct.
But, Roy, does that answer your question about how it works?
Hi, well, so I'm just curious about a business, for instance, healthcare. The hospital here in town is probably one of the biggest users of energy in the town. Have you guys installed solar on any hospitals in Maine? And I'm wondering what would be the benefit to the hospital, besides all the things that we talked about? Would there be a way to, are they going to get tax benefits? Like a commercial industry, because I know you talked about the power purchase agreements, and there are investors that then they get the tax benefits.
Yeah.
So that would be the route that the hospital would take.
Because so the fork in the road is are you a tax-paying entity? Yes or no?
You're talking about Waldo County is a
Waldo County.
nonprofit.
It's
I've checked
nonprofit.
into it because they have a nice building with standing seam metal, and it's facing south. So
Two of their buildings are anyway, but
yeah, one of those newer the one perpendicular to the road there.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, you could get a wealthy person or a corporation that needs to get rid of some tax burden can buy all the equipment basically, and the hospital can start paying lower than the current rate for electricity on day one without buying the equipment themselves basically. So it's a win-win.
That would apply to the hospital, the high school, all the schools,
Churches.
any nonprofits, churches, and that's where I think, was it Vern or John who were talking about power purchase agreement? Maybe you can explain the power purchase agreement.
So yeah, so real quick, so If it's a not, so essentially you have to ask the question, is the entity tax paying or not? If they're not, then realistically the financial return is a little bit further out, and most people pretty much are going to say they're not going to do it. Occasionally you have places that say we're going to do it anyway because it's actually not that bad, we're in it for the long haul. It really depends on your timeline in terms of when is the payback and how soon you need to be comfortable with that. The beauty of this equipment is long-lived, so it's easy to see the lifespan of the equipment go and actually actualize the benefits of it financially. If the entity is essentially not paying income tax, right now the main vehicle for that is what we call a power purchase agreement. And essentially, like Brian said, you find an investor that has the money and the tax appetite, and then essentially you align that investor with the nonprofit, and you essentially create a project where the investor puts that money in. They essentially fund and build the project, and then just bill the entity the electricity. The entity has to agree to buy that electricity for a set amount, usually a 25 to 30-year power purchase agreement, and then essentially then that energy is coming locally produced from that array, and that's how that arrangement works. And now, based on the stuff that Vaughn was talking about too, with the off-taker sites, part of the things that was cleared up with this recent round of legislation is you can actually do off-site power purchase agreements, which that wasn't possible during the LePage era, and that's opened up a whole new door now, so that larger, arrays, better economy of scale can be provided for really large providers like a hospital.
Thank you. I had a question about combining the residential 26% tax credit for a home-based business and also the commercial or the business benefits of the depreciation. Can that be done?
So, you want that, Brian?
Sure.
I'll do it if you
Well,
want.
I've got one customer who has a business, and I'm not going to say what it is, but he's got a farm too, and he's putting a big array out there to offset all his bills for his business, and that's as long as he's offsetting bills, he's not trying to sell electricity to his neighbors and get a bunch of credits. Just, oftentimes people maybe like yourselves, when I go out to a site evaluation, say, well, why should I only get 20? And I say, because that's what you need basically from your bill, but you want to put more power out there for the community maybe, but you generally don't do that because it's not going to pay you back. And there are possible solutions for that too, that maybe there is another incentive that the town could give you if you've got a really good roof to put some solar on to help you make that happen for you. I don't know.
But all tax stuff like that, you really got to talk to your accountant. We're solar installers, we're not accountants.
Yeah. Disclaimer for sure.
It usually depends on who owns it. If you're just doing a DBA and you're just a person, which we all are, some of us were at one time in doing a business, then you're going to own it, and you're going to have to talk with your tax accountant as to whether it can be a portion of using your home for a business. But if you have an a lot of renters, for instance, folks who have income property, if it's an LLC and the business owns it, it provides a pretty clear delineation in terms of whether it's in the commercial side and dealt with in the tax code on that side or the residential side on that side.
It's probably,
happy to chat afterwards.
Probably a lot of it is like your home use of your business use of your home.
Right.
The proportion of the area is probably relative to what you can deduct.
Two-part question. The quick one is, how far away is the maximum distance you could put a ground-based set of panels for a residential system?
It's all based on the wire side. Eventually the wire gauge and the wire length starts to get too expensive. The rule of thumb I like to use is 200 feet. Within 200 feet is nice. 300 feet we can do. Starts to get more than 300 feet. There's some details there, because that's just that wire run just starts to get expensive. So, that's a quick answer.
I'm the possessor of a lovely solar location, but a very tired standing seam metal roof. Are there any products coming down the way where you could integrate a new roof with this, or is it really two different things?
Sure, there are, but at the end of the day, you're better off dealing with them as two different things. They're actually less expensive, and it's better to let a roof be a roof and a solar panel be a solar panel at the end of the day.
Right on. Get another standing seam if you can, because that's great.
Yeah, no,
Right.
Questions?
Bev?
Thank you for having the Belfast, the former dump up there, which was done with a power purchase agreement, and I think we've got about maybe 4 more years to go on that. Wind ran into a lot of, not in my backyard, a lot of visual impact opponents. I'm wondering, these farms are coming, when you guys say they're coming fast, they're really coming fast. And I think we're going to see them in the next year showing up in Belfast, 20-acre sites. How many, I think, 2 questions. One is, roughly how many are permitted for Belfast? And secondly, have big solar farms run into that not in my backyard opposition?
So, yes. I mean, nothing here yet. We're still in it's a very speculative market right now. Everyone's rushing to get those sites, to get them in the queue with CMP and Emera Maine to try and be as early into a specific substation as they can. Last time I heard there was 1.1 gigawatts. It sounds like a Back to the Future joke. In the queue with CMP. A lot of those are going to not get built. Site, so early on, the whole legislative and bill policy process started really 3 years ago. What we came up with was really built on the roots of that. We had some interest at that time that were really on the land use planning. This year, as stuff started getting cut off the table, for instance, we used to have a prime farmland provision in that bill, and an agricultural entity came in and said, we will support this as long as you drop that, because I think they had farmer interests that wanted to make sure they'd have a revenue source. And there weren't other parties at the table with the speed of everything that was going on. Now, Maine Farmland Trust, the Department of Agriculture, and a few other entities have been involved in looking at land use planning for that, which I think I was very excited about, because I think those voices are very much needed. There's a project, I think, in Monroe at one point that's now in my backyard in Pittsfield that was proposed for some prime agricultural land. But we are going to see it, and I think, our piece is always, like the industry in Maine, we tend to get along really well because we've been dealing with similar pressures in terms of making sure with an industry that's new that you set a good example so that it can actually continue to grow. I think land use planning and siting is going to be a big piece of that, right? Like, if we end up putting them in places that just piss everybody off and hamper the ability to use that land in the future for needs that we're going to have in the future, that's going to be problematic. And so there are a lot of interests at the table that are looking at that and figuring out ways to do that, some with a carrot and some with a stick.
But it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Inevitably there's going to be those headlines. It's coming.
And there'll be local ordinance, there's Elmira, which is, up on the exit near Newport that heads up to Moosehead. They have a moratorium right now on large-scale solar development while they get that stuff figured out.
So I'm curious about some of the hidden environmental impacts of producing solar panels. Like, are they really energy intensive to produce, or require materials that are harmful to the environment to extract, or create nasty byproducts or anything like that? Can you all speak to that a little bit?
Well, there's one rating system, the California Toxics Coalition, that rates panels by toxicity and able to recyclability, and we stick to this premium category of panels when we buy them that are about the highest rated in those aspects. It's basically all that I really know, without following up deep dive on particular companies in India and South Korea and
So solar is a commodity, and just like any consumer product that gets purchased, there are some companies that do it well and some that don't. And as Brian said, there are some places like Silicon Valley Toxics Coalition that do some background on that. I think generally from a carbon perspective, the carbon investment pays itself back very quickly. It was 8 to 9 years. It was then down to 5 to 6, and I think we're in that like 3 to 5 range. Is that the number you have?
Companies are starting to put solar up to use the energy from the solar panels to be able to make solar panels. That's helping as well.
So, but getting at your point, at the end of the day, like looking at the stuff that was put up here at the beginning and building on what John said about solar being one piece of the puzzle, like we can't expect unfettered growth and just replacing one chunk with another chunk and expect that we're going to solve our problems. There's both a technological as well as a sociological solution that's needed if we're going to really get where we need to go.
Can I say one more thing on that? There are these graphs that we probably have seen if you looked into solar. So your solar production goes up in the daytime and then goes down like a bell curve, right? And our general society's consumption pattern, though, of the electricity goes up in the morning and then down during the day and then up in the evening and back down. It's the exact opposite of that. It's inverse. So there's, from my background as an organic farmer, there's a saying, make hay when the sun shines, right? So there's a term called load shifting, which can be automated, which can run machines during the daytime when the sun is shining. And just thinking of our lifestyles as like matching more with the natural rhythm of the planet instead of matching whatever we are used to in this society that we've become accustomed to, which is very much a very sliver of a moment in human history. So for most of human history, we operated during the daytime, you know, most of our energy was spent during then. So thinking that we, for somehow, are able to live outside of the bounds of what physics gives us is maybe part of our problem.
And part of that
I'm off of the soapbox for tonight.
And one other follow-up point on that too, it's in comparison to what, what other technology are we going, based on the slides that we saw in the beginning, is we got to start doing something. And if we just keep looking for perfect, we're not going to have enough time. And I think right now, based on what technological choices we have as humans to utilize, based on what I've been able to see out there, that is one that should seriously be considered, because there's really not too many other options on the table right now. Maybe someday we'll do better, but let's have that conversation when we get to that point, because we're not there based on what I'm seeing. And so.
It sounds like in order to get more information on your question, there's a California Toxicity Group, or
yeah, it was the Silicon Valley Toxics Coalition.
So you can probably Google that.
Could you talk a little bit about feeding back into the grid or being off the grid?
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, as a former off-gridder, I could talk about. So I was going to go into it, and I didn't, because it seems like most people are getting beyond the grid part of it these days. But real briefly, essentially there's a fork in that road. You're either going to be off the grid, which is no power lines, you're kind of independent, living free in the woods, living the dream. And essentially you're using solar panels typically, maybe a wind turbine, batteries, power grid goes down, it doesn't matter. But the key to that is batteries and a simple lifestyle, realistically. And most people in America are not going to go for that. They're not going to want to live that way, and most people are connected to the grid. As a business, we started out doing off-grid only, and then slowly went to the point where we don't do off-grid anymore. There's more people connected to the grid. If we're going to pull this off as a society, it's going to be because of that grid, realistically, that links us together, and there's good benefits of that. So. Maybe as the battery technology gets better over time, we might see that start to evolve. I think there's certain areas, I think that's going to be more of a microgrid, where you can have large battery storage that takes care of a community rather than individual households. So that's kind of, I don't know if that fully answers your question.
Yeah, what happens when the grid goes down?
So with the grid-tied system, when the grid goes down, you are without power. You're looking at your solar panels on the roof, and they're not on because we don't want to shock the utility worker who's trying to get your power back on. We are now able to do battery assisted systems, so that is an option we're doing more and more of now. So the Tesla Powerwall, we're installing those types of devices, and that'll do just essentially critical loads. So your well pump, your refrigerator, it's not going to charge an electric vehicle, it's not going to run an air source heat pump. So if you're willing to kind of pare down what those loads are, a battery backup is an option. If you want emergency power, right now the best way to do that is with a generator still.
And I would just add to that, I mean, when you look, just looking at it from a household, and you look at the percentage of energy use that's electricity, it's a pretty small percent. It's usually like 20 to 30% depending on the household. If you're just looking at electricity usage and not taking in the heat piece, if you go off grid, you start to really limit what you can do to the other 70% of the energy piece. So you're not, and then when you start to think in the transportation piece, you start to see even more, limits in terms of decarbonizing. And so a lot of times people have the impression that going off grid is better for the planet. At the end of the day, batteries aren't water. And the amount of energy that we use for heating and so forth, I mean, it depends. If folks are burning wood and they do the lifestyle piece, there's a place to do it. But at the end of the day, connecting to the grid allows you to do what we call beneficial electrification, which, I mean, if you've driven an electric car, it's unbelievable that in an hour and a half you can expend as much energy driving down the road as your house uses in electricity in a day. Right, like it's pretty unbelievable, and so we have to look at that whole big picture. And being off grid, it's going to be hard to be able to do that.
I'll say a couple things about off grid real quick. You generally don't do it unless you live really far down the road, and it's going to cost a lot of money to get power in there, because if you bought a piece of property way down a road and you're going to spend $70,000 getting poles put in, then your $35,000 off-grid system starts looking pretty good. But you have to live in a certain way, and then a lot of the off-grid, if they're using lead-acid batteries or sealed lead-acid batteries, you might have a generator in the mix too. So you've got a generator that you don't really think of as being off-grid, but you might have a generator to top your batteries off so that they don't go dead. But when you look at a backup system, there's another way to look at the battery cost too, that really long-term costs in terms of an auto transfer switch, generator, and a big propane tank, and then a couple generator lifetimes and a visit from a repair person or two might cost you as much as a whole house battery backup without the chemicals and without the headaches, because the battery can last for many years if you only use it when you need backup once or twice or 3 times a year. So we do whole house backup things too. They don't cost, they cost way more than and they blow apart your return on investment and your payback period.
How many years can you realistically expect the panels to last generally, and what might threaten them? Ice storms or hurricanes or wildlife, or what kinds of things could threaten them?
I've seen lawnmowers and branches. Those are the pieces with trees falling on stuff. They're really durable. They'll last 30, 40 years. So it's usually the roof lifespan that is the concern, not the panel lifespan.
The ones that are on the ground, for instance, they'll last 30 years.
Oh yeah.
25-year warranty on the panels, that they're going to make a stated amount of power over 25 years. And then when you look at it, there's no moving parts. Solar module should easily go to 35 years.
And what about hailstones?
Yeah, hailstones, ice storms.
Well, we've installed a lot, I think, thousands and thousands of systems. I can't think of a single hailstorm event on a solar electric. Solar hot water, I've seen solar hot water systems break in a hailstorm. At Maple Hill, they got clobbered over there. But the solar panels on the building survived.
What's the difference between the two that explains that?
Solar thermal, what do you mean?
Well, you're saying solar thermal panels can be damaged by hailstorms.
Here's just fragile, more fragile glass, just evacuated tube glass technology is a little bit more fragile.
Non-tempered.
Right.
That type of glass is non-tempered, yeah. And we have the proof in the pudding, which is like back to the landers who moved in the 80s and have off-grid systems where you still see panels that are doing really well. Yeah, it's
Right, 85-watt panels are still going.
totally.
Yeah, my neighbors, Mike and Margie at Co-Housing, they claim to be one of the first in the state probably to have, they don't own them anymore, they're still out there functioning, I think.
Okay, if you were to, let's say, like determine a place unfit to receive solar panels, what type of factors would you take into account then?
Unfit?
Yeah.
Shade.
Yeah.
Trees that you can't do anything about that are in the wrong place. It's, you want to basically be able to look south and see sky.
Roof condition, realistically, what's the condition of the, if it's going on a roof, what is that condition of the roof and how soon, what are the maintenance, needs of that roof? That's a biggie.
Energy use of people, they're actually, it's a funny phenomenon. The folks that are better at conserving energy tend to have the worst economics for investing solar because a system that's twice as big doesn't cost twice as much. So if they just have a tiny little incy bill, I just need to put in a couple panels, scale matters. So it's a great question. But at the end of the day, it's funny because I was just actually having this conversation on the phone coming down. The end of the day, it comes down to value, and everybody's sense of value is very different. We've had people who could get a 5-year payback on a system with a beautiful roof and a big system that are like, doesn't pay off fast enough. Then we've had people who get a 20-year payback on something and they're like, awesome, I've dreamed about this my entire life, I'm so excited, let's do it. So a lot of times it comes down to value, but definitely access to sun is number one.
So I'd like to, go ahead.
For the efficiency of panels, where are they now and where do you think they'll be in 5 years?
Well, there's the bell curve thing, right? So heavy investment over these last decades, 4 decades, we've had a lot of increasing efficiency. And that's going to be harder to get because the lower hanging fruit is, but we're up to like 370 watt panels and 380s.
Yeah, I've got 280 on my boat, and it looks like you're talking about the same size, from 280 to 370 now?
Getting up to that range, yeah, it's a range.
If we could predict this, I mean, it's so funny. We keep thinking we can predict this stuff, and I'm just kind of like, yeah, we're starting to see that flattening out, and then all of a sudden somebody splits a cell, somebody puts in a new bus bar, uses a new type of silicon. I mean, there is a practical limit that we'll hit, but it's been impressive to see some of the gains. But we've reached the kind of know that there's cost in that. So as we look at it from a dollar per watt perspective and compare apples to apples, it's still staying pretty flat. We are starting to see some high output modules that are, yeah.
But the exciting part about this is we're just kind of in some ways getting started in terms of humanity's putting an emphasis on this to where now Wall Street money is behind it. Everybody's starting to see the writing on the wall for fossil fuels, so therefore a lot of money is getting thrown into this. So that part's very, very encouraging in terms of like where we're going to go. If you're going to bet on something, the internal combustion engine's done. We've done what we can do with that, and it's over. And essentially, the beauty of this technology is we're just kind of getting started in some ways in terms of what those possibilities are going to be and all those little tweaks that we can start to do. So that part's really fun to see.
First, I just want to say I don't have solar on my business or on my house. I'm on the Energy Committee for the City of Belfast, City Government of Belfast, and John and I have talked about like what are these two committees, the Climate Crisis Committee, and the Energy Committee. The Energy Committee pretty much came from us going through the budget year after year and spending hundreds of thousands of dollars every year on electric and oil. And so now we're That's one of our solar fields. We have a big one now at the Highway Department, 5 acres. Now, the power purchase agreements, somebody else gets the benefit. They pay for it. They get the benefit for the first 7 years. You correct me if I'm wrong up there. And after that, you buy them out and you keep the system, and there you go. Then you get it. But the third, that 5 acre, we were building a huge highway department, and we just bonded it right in. And so we'll all be paying for it for a number of years.
We'll hear from another member of the Energy Committee.
Yes. You can go. You can go. No, go ahead. All right. Yeah, I got that voice. So, some towns have done solarized projects where there's been a discounted rate because of buying in large numbers. Are you still providing that? I know several companies have done that. I'm not sure if all three of you have. I assume you have. Is that still an option? And what is the average reduction of a residential? Is it like a 10% reduction in cost, or what is the benefit if we organize Belfast with a solarizing program?
I'll say it. So yeah, no, I'll say it. So the solarized projects, I think, did their purpose at their time, right? We had uncertainty in the market. Prices were, 20+% higher than they are now. And a lot of it was about kind of getting that groundswell of the foundation together. And I think I had discussions with a number of companies as far as where we are at this point. And I think you may find some companies that are willing to do it, but I think for the most part, we've hit that critical mass of understanding. The financial mechanisms are there. Some of the other underlying structures are there. So I think at the end of the day, most of those projects did what they needed to then. Now it's going to be really difficult. I keep seeing we get emails about people wanting us to bid on municipal projects and wanting to bid on this and wanting to bid on that. There is so much demand right now that going into bid processes and going into those it's a challenge in a business model to do when there is so much demand. And I'm concerned that some of the bid processes, honestly, are going to actually come out higher than they might otherwise, and are really going to feed large out-of-state companies with labor that, who knows, it's going to be low wage, etc. So they did their purpose at that time. I think some of the structural pieces and getting the word out, events like this and getting the word out and making it visible have as much impact at this point as the solarized projects.
And the reality of the marketplace is there's plenty of solar providers in our area, that the marketplace is competitive enough that you'll probably get as good of a discount just through the natural mechanism there. From the side of the business doing that, all the savings that they say are embedded in those programs don't actually actualize. You actually spend more money on a solarized campaign as a business. So to then, on top of that, give a discount doesn't make good business sense. So, like Vaughn said.
Why are the federal tax credits for solar going down? I think that seems kind of counterintuitive.
3 years ago, almost at this point, we're going to go away entirely. And this was it was interesting because our entire DC delegation actually voted to extend the tax credit, which was curious at the time. Given Bruce Pollock was there, he surprised me. His office surprised me, frankly, with the discussions that we had with everybody. And so the idea was, by stepping it down, there are some pieces of the step down that are actually good in some ways. While we talk about the necessity to do this, for a lot of folks that's an abstraction. Like, yes, I need to do this for climate change. Your power's not going to go off tomorrow if you don't do this. But the perception of a step down gets people to act in some ways, so there's some of that's good. I would love to see that thing continuing to step down, with the caveat that negotiated in that was a step down of incentives for the competing fuel sources, like all the fossil fuel money that's out there. Good luck in trying to get that done. So it's a political challenge, and sometimes these things don't make sense. I would say, with the history of what John calls a solar coaster, when I was in this early, every little ride down seemed really scary. And it seems that over time, as you look at it, you step back and you're like, oh, these curves are on a trajectory that actually go in the right direction. So again, that's also putting faith in practicality in DC, which right now is kind of a lost art. So we'll see what happens.
But from a climate perspective, if we need to make change quickly, I think having incentives like that essentially helped really kick it into high gear. So if we're trying to actually make up for lost ground, then I think that reenacting that and creating other incentives would be actually really beneficial.
With the economies of scale, are the prices of panels and installation coming down? And will they get to a point where the need for incentives, tax breaks will be unnecessary? And related to the climate coaster, the solar coaster, if someone graduated from high school and they became a solar installer, is it a long-term career, or is there going to be a solar coaster aspect to it?
I could say that I'm going to turn 49, and I just got into the sales, solar sales, after I have a degree in landscape architecture, and I've done park ranger stuff and all, but I was building houses right before this, and at this point you want to probably get off the roofs. There are people out here that might still be doing their own roofing in their 60s, and I don't want to be up on the roof, but I think that if you're involved in a company and you learn the ropes, there are channels for advancement in these. There are skills that people have that have done this for years, that you run into the same issue and the same problem, and they know how to do things, practical things. These things that the folks that we employ learn real practical skills that can be transferred into all kinds of things. Leadership.
Well, Paul, I think your question may have been, is there going to be a saturation point in solar capacity?
We got a long ways to go for that in Maine, realistically, in society. If we're going to really electrify our economy and drive electric vehicles like they say all the major manufacturers are going to go there, we'll do the math on that. Where's the electricity going to come from? If it comes from coal, we didn't actually do anything different. So I think we've got many generations to not have to worry about that side of it, and there's going to be all multiple facets of this, the service part of it, to so I think there's plenty of employment security in this field, and definitely encourage folks to think about that. If you're talking to people coming out of high school and they don't know what to do, the trades right now are an incredible spot to go in right now. They're in high demand. We've got a lot of college graduates who can't find jobs, but there's a lot of trades folks who there's plenty of work in that sector right now.
So my question follows right on that. I'm at Belfast Adult Ed, and we do some career readiness, work ready sort of stuff. But is there a training program if you want to go into solar design? What would I tell people who are interested in this? Where would they go? Would they go to a community college? And does the Waldo County Tech Center have something in place with their high school students right now? I think it would be really good for high school students to know about what's going on, and that's.
Yeah. You want Mr. KVC?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I used to be involved in this and help integrate solar into traditional trades programs with the Department of Energy through KVCC. What's been interesting to watch in the development is a lot of the training centers are actually struggling because there's such a need, like right now, as we talked about, there is such a need for people. If you can come in and show up to work on time and have a good head on your shoulders and want to do something positive, you can get hired yesterday to do this. And there are a lot of training programs. Revision has an in-house one. We're collaborating with local community college. There's a lot of on-the-job training that takes place. So there are a lot of pathways through actual apprenticeship, like the old school education system. So KVCC's programs, they have solar programs that have been seeded by the DOE that are pretty much dormant right now. And so it's the need is out there, education, and like getting on the point of like people, we cannot train people fast enough to move into some of the upper level positions in the company and what you would see as a normal path of growth within a company. It's consistently need for we're pulling people in from other industries, right? You're pulling some folks up. It's the demand's crazy. And so, I mean, there are opportunities. I think the biggest piece is exposing folks to the understanding that these places, and like what John talked about, I've watched for several decades our schools, and I was a teacher, beat up tech education and community colleges, second class work. And who are the people in rural Maine that are successful and live in their communities? The kids that get shopped at the boat school and get told that, they're getting a second class education because they're not going to go to 4 years college. We got to reverse what that looks like and really help people understand that and get them out actually doing these trades so they can see what it looks like so they can make a difference.
Yes, I mean, there just needs to be information in the high schools about what this pathway looks like. I'm a high school student, I have no idea what it looks like to work at Revision Energy.
And we have so Waldo County Tech Center has an advisory board, we sit on that as well, so we're in communication with them. We've donated inverters to them to be able to, for students to be able to actually work on stuff and all that, so it's starting to happen.
So thank you for your work.
And just one a question about, like, is there a future to address electrifying our fossil fuel capacity is going to be about a 4-fold increase in electrical use in the state of Maine. So if we're just think of how much energy right now we're using as electricity, that's increased 4-fold, and we're trying to meet a significant portion of that, at least 30%, maybe significantly more than that, by solar. And right now, what are we, just above 1%? Mm-hmm. So, the demand, for our society to roll into this and the need for workers, that's a long-term, very, promising part of our economy.
So let's say we got to 40%. How would CMP or somebody else generate the energy at night or when the clouds are there?
All of this is at the end of the day, we have to pull the utilities in on this discussion. And Emira, for instance, sees that and recognizes their business model is going to change, much like the telephone industry did. Whereas CMP sees using their heft in Augusta and Hollowell to continue to fight for the model that they have. Ultimately, this is going to require people who've been on the opposite side of the table to work together, and we've been very willing to do that for a very long time. Well, maybe not a very long time. For the last 4 years or so, we've been willing to do that. And I think that we're going to see things move in that direction.
But even theoretically, how do you do it? I mean,
battery storage, wind,
load shifting.
Yeah.
Efficiency.
Through a Marshall Plan, dedicated, all rowing in the same direction and trying to put the best minds in America on it. That's the only way we're going to pull this off. We're just getting started.
Karen?
How worried are you about competition from out-of-state solar companies coming in and undercutting?
I'm not. Most of the stuff, they're not, like a lot of the scale that's existed, they're not going to come in and compete at. The residential, the small commercial, you're not going to see companies come in and do that. The biggest piece is messaging, I think, is the biggest concern I have, is what the messaging of the value proposition is going to be from companies that have more heft. So I kind of touched on in my piece of basically having community solar be the end-all be-all. There's some benefits of it, but at the end of the day, I think it's about how Mainers extract the most value out of it. I think that's the biggest. And there'll be, I mean, some of the companies are moving into, or Revision definitely has been in a space where they'll be competing with some of these companies, but Revision also, how many calls do you get, John, where someone says, I've got somebody who's pestering me for my 25 to 30 acres in Maine? Some of that kind of distrust of people from away is actually driving people to talk to people that they trust to find that out. So
I think the biggest thing will be the fine print, in terms of when the solar farm options start to become available and you get like 10 mailers a week from just everybody, and just it becomes a confusing marketplace. We're going to see that because that's what's happened in other states. When it comes to actual rooftop or local solar installation, there's very few companies in the US as crazy as us to do what we do, and once they see that, they're gonna be like, no thanks, So I think we'll be fine. We've got that Yankee work ethic that's that's carried us through. With the fact that we've been able to actually exist during the LePage era and grow our businesses is a testament to how hard we've all been. How hard we've all been working. So,
in case people missed Vaughn's kind of subtle point up there, though, when you own a system, you're going to get more return on investment than if you buy into a big deal somewhere. It's like the financial model is better than where I'm from in Maryland, where you rent it and you get a cheaper rate of electricity on your house. You don't really get the same kind of return on investment as you can get here in this market that we have.
So, as we're beginning to wrap up, I'm going to use the chair's privilege to ask two questions. First, with respect to renters, people who don't own homes, does this new system provide an opportunity for them to get solar power at a reasonable investment? Talk about it.
Well, that'd be the solar farm option. So the community solar farm option allows individuals to buy a share of a solar farm and have that electricity just get applied to their account. They don't need to necessarily own the home. They can move. The array just needs to be in that same utility and the credits can be applied. So that's going to be, really huge for people who are planning to sell their house in 3 years, or they do rent, or they have a shady spot, or for whatever reason. So it is going to open up the market and that option to more people.
And so would they look up solar farms on Google, or how do they find someone to talk to about that?
They'll find you, trust me. This is the calm before the storm. Come springtime next year, I'd be shocked if everybody here doesn't get contacted. There's essentially large companies that's what they've got a model that they're just coming in the main and it's going to come off.
They're tying up some land so they can have a
You'll see.
So my second question is for nonprofits. Let's say I'm a school or a church or a food kitchen, and I want to access one of these power purchase agreements you referred to. I wasn't clear on the process. It sounded as though they needed to go out and find an investor to take the 30% or the 26% tax credit. How does that actually work if they contact one of you guys?
Well, it probably varies from company to company in all reality. So I don't know how specifically you want to dive in. I'd say if you're interested in that option, reach out to one of the companies and just see what that offer is. For the most part, I think we're all bringing investor money to the table.
That's my understanding, was that most of the companies have investors already lined up behind you who want to know about a project so they can front the money with little or no down payment by the institution and take that 26% tax credit and then accept the payments from the nonprofit for the electricity. So it's not, the nonprofit doesn't have to go out and pound the pavement looking for people to invest.
Yeah, we're not short on money, we're short more on off-takers. That's going to change and just only grow over time as this gets more popular and more people know about it in all reality.
Well, Bev has told me we should wrap up now because it's past 7:30. I want to thank you guys very much for your contributions. I don't know if all three of the companies had the chance to put their stuff out on tables, but take a look at their stuff. If they're willing to stay for a few minutes, you can talk to them. And thank you all for attending.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.